Um, Donald Barcel is an American postmodernist writer, regarded as one of the greatest innovators and experimenters. He is usually viewed by critics as a highly philosophical writer. They state that his deepest intellectual roots seem to lie in the philosophies of existentialism and postmodernism. He worked steadily throughout his life, producing 4 novels: Snow White, The Dead Father, Paradise, and The King, and over 100 short stories originally collected in Comeback, Dr. Caligari, Unspeakable Practices, Unnatural Acts, City Life, and Sadness, and later compiled into 2 best-of books, 60 Stories and 40 Stories, as well as a non-fiction book, Guilty Pleasures, and a plethora of short essays and interviews on a diverse range of topics. In spite of this, he is mainly famous for his short stories. Famous mainly for his short stories, Barcel was a relentless innovator and experimenter. His principal methods were the collage and pastiche. Though in his earlier works he described ordinary life and employed more traditional forms of writing, his short stories presented below are absurdist and surreal, playful and ironic. His symbolism mainly bases on nonsense. One common term for this kind of storytelling is metafiction. And now about postmodernism. Scholars find it difficult to decide when exactly the postmodernist period began. Most generally accepted view is that it emerged as an area of academic study in mid-1980s. The term postmodernism is not easily defined because this phenomenon embraces wide variety areas of study: philosophy, film, music, art, literature, etc. This movement seems to emerge from or supersede modernism. The period of modernism began in 1910, as Virginia Woolf stated, in or about December 1910, human nature changed, and so-called high modernist period continued about 20 years. The founders of this literary movement and its major literary figures, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, Thomas Eliot, Ezra Pound, etc., experimented in new forms of expression in literature. Below we shall present some characteristic features of modernism described by Mary Clakes in order to decide how postmodernism follows the essential features of modernism. From a literary perspective, the main characteristics of modernism include an emphasis on impressionism and subjectivity in writing, and in visual arts as well, an emphasis on how seeing or reading or perception itself takes place rather than on what is perceived. An example of this would be stream of consciousness writing. A movement away from the apparent objectivity provided by omniscient third-person narrators, fixed narrative points of view, and clear-cut moral positions. Faulkner's multiply narrated stories are an example of this aspect of modernism. A blurring of distinctions between genres so that poetry seems more documentary and prose seems more poetic. An emphasis on fragmented forms, discontinuous narratives, and random seeming collages of different materials. A tendency toward reflexivity or self-consciousness about the production of the work of art, so that each piece calls attention to its own status as a production, as something constructed and consumed in particular ways. Postmodernism follows the above phenomenological features of modernism, though seeks certain alternatives to it. Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, for example, comments John Neary and quotes Lodge's words, the most extreme of modernist literary imagination certainly resists interpretation because of the formidable difficulty of its verbal style and narrative method. Nonetheless, says Lodge, we try to read even this supremely difficult modernist novel in the face that it is ultimately susceptible of being understood, that we shall eventually be able to unpack all the meanings that Joyce put into it, and that these meanings will cohere into a unity. But Lodge asserts postmodernism subverts that phase. The above-quoted author Mary Clegg says, modernism, for example, tends to present a fragmented view of human subjectivity and history. Think of The Wasteland, for instance, or of Wolfe's To the Lighthouse, but presents the fragmentation as something tragic, something to be lamented and mourned as a loss. Many modernist works try to uphold the idea that works of art can provide the unity, coherence, and meaning which has been lost in most of modern life. Art will do what other human institutions fail to do. Postmodernism, in contrast, does not lament the idea of fragmentation, provisionality, or incoherence, but rather celebrates that. The world is meaningless. Let's not pretend that art can make meaning then. Let's just play with nonsense.